Pac-Man World 3 is the often derided sequel to Pac-Man World 2. It's also a game I'm quite fond of, personally. That's not to say I don't understand the criticisms, of course. World 3 has an entirely new tone from its predecessors, a vastly different setting, and an abundance of dialogue. It feels more like a comic book or cartoon made for a late preteen to teenage audience than a proper Pac-Man game. That said, I think it does all the things it tries to do with reasonable success. The dialogue is witty, the settings are memorably morose, and the overarching narrative provides an interesting new take on Pac-Man's relationship with his ghostly nemesis. In this video, I'm hoping to detail exactly how Pac-Man World 3 does all those things right. Come along for the ride. Given Pac-Man World 3 is an action platformer, there is a fair bit of action and platforming. Who'd have thought? We're going to go over the action first since it's one of the more polarizing elements of the game. You spend a lot of time on this adventure busting up enemies with melee, punches, rev rolls, and butt bounces. The combat is swift, impactful, and satisfying, with slappy sound effects occupying the boisterous hit sparks. There's also a surprising amount of strategy to the proceedings, considering your limited moveset. The enemy types, few that there are built around countering your moves with their varied, well-conveyed physical properties, leaving you switching between simple punches, butt bounces, and rev rolls dynamically to deliver delicious yellow justice as the situation demands it. It's certainly a head above much other 3D action platformer combat, insofar that the fighting here feels like it could be from a genuine beat-em-up, albeit an extremely simple one. You see an enemy, quickly analyze its weaknesses, and exploit that weakness. As more enemies with their own varied properties pour in, you learn to adjust on the fly, until it's like solving a dozen tiny puzzles all at once, as fast as you can. It's not challenging, mostly thanks to the game's general desire to lean toward forgiving health drops and numerous power-ups, but there's always the option to optimize your movement and blows to a finely sharpened baddie smiting spear. So I approve of that. And hey, the power-ups are really fun anyway. My personal favorite is the electroshock, because it's a simple trade-off. You lose maneuverability, but you also stun any enemy, and it's a projectile, giving you the range advantage. Pac-Man's moveset in general, even outside of combat, has a high skill ceiling when you learn to chain the rev roll and butt bounce effectively. The rev roll is a somewhat muted spin dash from 3D Sonic games, and the butt bounces allow you to immediately cancel your momentum. This ensures you can fling yourself through the air and stop on a dime with graceful ease. Much like the fighting, there's no explicit need to optimize your moves like this, but the option is there, and it makes for a much more rewarding experience. The levels you explore, wherein you enact your hopefully skilled movement, are primarily interested in being memorable and atmospheric. But even outside of the dramatic soundtrack and varied environments, there's a lot to enjoy. The levels are littered with physics playgrounds for the rev roll, collectibles that are devilishly hidden both in darkened corners and on enticingly distant ledges. And there's almost always some manner of new bauble or puzzle to interact with, unique to your present location. How much you enjoy the design here is most probably related to how much you enjoy exploring. There are plenty of areas that left me asking, wow, how do I get up there? And searching around for the answer. There are also these pack dot chains that give you excellent overviews of the landscape. The landscapes themselves can be rather open and multi-tiered. It's a good time, I think. To top it all off, every platforming mechanic gets something interesting to do, even if you could never call them fully explored. There is, however, that one thing which even fans of this game consider a blight: the spectral monster fights, where our yellow hero nabs a power pellet and chases down spectral monsters before his invulnerability wears out. These fights have been called cumbersome, slow, tedious, and all manner of flow-ruining no-good poopy. Personally, though, I think they're fine. The environment is often well designed to give you multiple angles of approach, on the spectral monsters, and power pellet timers make these fights feel like miniature speedrun segments, especially if you enjoy practicing the movement. I dig it. Now, don't get me wrong, I also understand a fair number of criticisms for this game were levied at the game's status as a sequel. And yeah, it's true, Pac-Man World 3 is certainly very different from its predecessor. Pac-Man World 2 is more harrowing, focused on exploring a narrow set of mechanics using high-skill environmental platforming that requires pinpoint maneuvering around small platforms and ever-present hazards. It's thrilling, but it's also trying to be a different kind of experience. You could argue that World 3 should be more similar to World 2 since it's a sequel, but hey, the original Pac-Man World was also quite different. I think it's fine for each entry to have its own gameplay style. So, do I have any personal complaints? Any to call my own? I have one. The bosses are genuinely unbearably dull. You flip a switch, move to another switch, and flip that switch to make the boss vulnerable, and then you hit him. That's not an inherently bad pattern, but there's so little else to it that it feels mandated. Like they only have boss battles because they needed to have boss battles. I don't know why they included 2 of them either. That's about all the bad I have to say though, honestly. It's really a perfectly fine interactive experience. If you were to ask me what I consider the definitive version of Pac-Man's character, I would point to his portrayal in Pac-Man World 3. I'm fully aware that this is a controversial opinion, and that other people have good reason to disagree. How he's shown in World 3 is contrary to nearly every prior portrayal, but honestly, I don't see why that's so bad. In World 3, Pac-Man is not quite an everyman, but he's definitely a family man. He's got a fair bit of sardonic wit in his jolly yellow body. He's a people's hero, and he does what needs done because it needs done. Reminds me of an older, more world-weary Spider-Man. Folks often criticize the Paxter's general snark in this game, but all his behaviors make sense in context. He was teleported away from his family to help combat a world's-ending threat from a megalomaniac supervillain hell-bent on plaguing all the universe with unending, lifeless darkness. And on top of that, our yellow buddy is supposed to team up with his former enemies. He has a good reason to be so snippy. And yeah, not everyone gets along, but that's kind of the point. They have chemistry, engaging banter, and it feels like a proper adventure with characters from different walks of life who are coming together in the pursuit of a common objective, the salvation of light and life as they know it. The game also boasts an extremely expansive vocabulary and some genuinely creative world building, just to add a couple more cherries atop its impressive resume. I have virtually no complaints about the writing. It's wildly different from what most people would expect, that's for sure, but that doesn't mean it's bad, and art shouldn't always have to adhere to our preconceived notions. In summary, Pac-Man World 3 has a good personality, strong sense of environmental variety, compelling narrative with high stakes and creative world building, robust combat mechanics, and solid level design. I think people perhaps get too caught up in what they'd like Pac-Man to be, rather than what Pac-Man wants to be, which is especially strange to me, given this series' many, many other turns over the years. Pac-Man's been a rolly ball game, a standard 3D platformer, a 2D platformer, a puzzle game, an endless runner, the list goes on. I think taking a chance to flex his action platforming and snarking muscles shouldn't be out of the question, is what I'm saying here. Pac-Man World 3 is a good game that was just done dirty, and I think it deserved better. Hey, you made it. We're at the end of the video. Now it's time to talk about my Patreon. Did you know that if you grab certain tiers from it, you can directly influence the content I make? It's true. You can also just offer general support too. And speaking of that support, some lovely people have already pledged. People I will list for you now. My wonderful supporters are iPompous, Anonymous, Jay, Marth Sinclair, Call Me Haley, Sam Anderson, Some Call Me Anto, Wapoza, Mint Horse, Mike Hansen, and Kay Storkson. Thank you all so much for your time and thoughts, and I'll talk to you in the next video.